The Responsibility of Investing is a podcast by the PRI, the world's largest global body on responsible investment, representing over $128 trillion in assets under management. Each episode features conversations with thought leaders and experts from around the world, exploring how sustainable factors are transforming the investment landscape. This series helps PRI signatories and the wider investment community navigate responsible investment with greater precision and confidence for the benefit of both investors and society.
Welcome to the Responsibility of Investing, the PRI's podcast. Today's program is about the PRI Awards. The PRI Awards celebrate outstanding leadership and continuous innovation amongst PRI signatories. As you all know, our signatories span the whole investment chain, from asset owners over investment managers to service providers. The awards try to recognize those signatories who have demonstrated leading practices in stewardship, communication, and investment practices, all in response to pressing issues surrounding human rights, climate change, and biodiversity. These awards not only highlight best practices, but also reinforces the PRI's mission towards a more sustainable global financial system, showcasing real-world examples, concrete examples of innovative practices. We are convinced that as such, we encourage investors to adopt and advance responsible investment principles. I want to add that submissions for the 2025 PRI Awards closed in June, with a diverse and strong range of entries, totaling 139 submissions spanning across our 6 award categories. Our 6 award categories for completeness is innovations for responsible investment strategy, innovation in system stewardship, recognition for action in climate, recognition for action in nature, and recognition for action in human rights. And new for this year, and admittedly one of my hobby horses, is a recognition for excellence in communication. Why is it one of my hobby horses? Well, because there's so much happening in our industry that leads the world in the right direction, yet we do not always communicate cleverly about it or effectively about it. And if a PRI award can help pushing that effort a little, I would be very, very happy. There's also 3 special awards coinciding with what we think at the PRI is very important with regards to the development of responsible investing in the next number of years. So there is a special award for emerging markets, open to signatories who are headquartered in emerging markets, private markets, as we feel this category will be a driver with increasing importance for the next number of years, and asset owners, as we feel our asset owners are ready to claim their role as the alpha and omega of the investment chain. This year's PRI Awards will be announced at New York Climate Week, and we will release a shortlist shortly. New York Climate Week means mid-September, but whilst we wait in anticipation of the winners, we're looking forward to a conversation, as said today, with one of our award judges, Claire Hierons, and a shortlisted entry from the Church Commissioners of England. And here to represent that entry is Neale, Responsible Investment Social Lead. Welcome, Claire, and welcome, Dan.
Thanks so much.
First question for Claire. First and foremost, Claire, can you tell us a little bit about the Laudes Foundation that you represent?
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, the Laudes Foundation, we are a foundation trying to help business be a force for good. We concentrate on 3 sectors: fashion, built environment, and food, all of which represent a high instance of workers and people that will be impacted by transition, and industries that have a high carbon footprint and need to transition. So we're a climate foundation in that sense, but our primary focus is around how we put people at the heart of transition, so how we make a transition just. I actually head up the finance and capital markets team. So what we're doing there is looking at the role of finance in both enabling that transition and then how finance itself needs to change and adopt maybe different practices if that transition is going to happen.
All right. Thanks, Claire. I hear transition quite a lot, so
Oh,
that's
yeah.
yeah, and it's good to say that it's fair to say that that we agree that that's one of the keywords in everything we do. How do we transition? How do we progress? How do we lead everything we are trying to influence into the right direction? So thanks for that. On the PRI Awards, can you tell us a little bit more about your involvement with the awards? How long have you been judging? And why are you happy or even proud, maybe, to be involved?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've done 3 years worth, and for the last 2 years, I've looked at the system stewardship category, which I've particularly asked for because I'm very interested in how investors are starting to think systemically about change. I am really proud to be involved, to be honest, because it looks behind the scenes at what investors are actually doing. It shows how they're being pioneering, and in these slightly difficult times, dare I say that, it gets beyond the rhetoric and everything that's in headlines. I think to your point around narrative, it's very, very important at the moment to see what people are actually getting on and doing in their day jobs despite everything. So I'm really proud to be associated with it.
All right. And then more concretely, I guess, what's your view on the submissions you've seen this year?
I have been so heartened by what I've read this year. I mean, they've always been brilliant. There's always been something in there that surprised me and enthused me and has showed real innovation. Honestly, there were brand new initiatives, new things, new innovations that I hadn't seen before. I felt like the applicants were getting more and more sophisticated in the work that they were doing. I mean, that word system is really beginning to mean something. And I think almost most heartening of all was that there was global coverage. And it's so exciting to see so many regions covered by the awards and so many countries that are, really beginning to lead the way. When we might think of them as countries that need help through, I mean, going back to that word transition, where
Hmm.
actually, they're really taking a pioneering role and being the leaders.
That's a good thing to see, right? Because it will be important going forward. Sustainability and responsible investing doesn't stop at borders, does it?
It really doesn't. It really doesn't.
Hey Claire, how are the awards relevant in our ever-changing world or in our ever-changing responsible investment landscape that we find ourselves in?
Well, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with the question. It is a very, very dynamic world that we live in. I mean, lots of things are changing. Things are changing for the worse, for the better, but they are certainly changing. And I think being responsive is going to be the one constant in all of that. The awards are so relevant in a changing context because they give people an opportunity to step up and show what they're doing. It doesn't have to be perfect. I think sometimes in the awards, I love to see where people have tried things that maybe haven't gone as well and they've had to overcome obstacles or challenges. It just allows people in a safe place to show what the world is capable of if
Hmm.
leadership is allowed to shine. And I think that's never been more important.
Hmm. No, and going back to the favorite word that we already defined, transition is never perfect, right? It's
Messy, messy stuff.
I wasn't gonna go that far, but absolutely. I think you answered my next question already a little bit, Claire, in looking at a couple of things. But are there any trends that you have seen over the 3 years that you've been a judge? I already heard you say a lack of a trend was important because you were expecting the investment world to retreat a little bit or to be a little bit more silent. But yeah, that seems to be continuing.
Yeah, and I apologise to your members for being cynical because it
Mm.
clearly wasn't the case, and I'm really pleased to see it. Now, I think the trend is if I go to the sort of the systems stewardship category that I was looking at. I mean, I think systems maybe a few years ago, people were beginning to think of systems trying to pick systemic metrics and think about individual points of issue that had a systemic nature to them. I think I can see maturing a real understanding that the world economy, the world itself is one big system and everything is connected.
Hmm.
And that's a very, very difficult thing to manage and think about in the context of a portfolio and an investment strategy. But I can see that really coming through, that investors beginning to think a lot more holistically about some of these issues. Which when I think about issues of a just transition, the need to think about people in the heart of something that's quite a technical issue, and as the way it's been presented, I think that's super important. Being able to understand and quantify and act on how things are connected to each other. That seems to be a growing trend. And then I would say that the trend towards different regions of the world stepping up, different parts of the world, really beginning to show a leadership stance, is incredibly encouraging.
Okay, thanks. And I really and truly feel, because I've seen some of the preparations and talked to a lot of people in preparing for it, but we'll see that in the PRI in person in Brazil later this year. That yeah, what we call emerging and development economy in developing economies, yeah, are stepping up to the plate and not waiting or not waiting for our permission, so to speak, to do what they have to do. So that's very encouraging. I agree. Hey Dan, can I come to you? Thanks for joining. And I will get to the PRI Awards very soon. But first, maybe just if you could present the Church Commissioners for England very briefly.
Sure. So we're an £11 billion endowment fund that represents the long-term assets for the Church of England. So it goes back to the 1700s. So whereas Claire's talking about sort of what you do with the allocation of that money and the projects that go with it, we're on the other side of that, which is the creation of the long-term stewardship of those assets, basically forever, or until, and as the First Church States Commissioner says, until Jesus comes back. That's our investment horizon timeline. So we have to invest and act accordingly.
On my hobby horse of communication, right? You speak the language of your constituents, so that's very, very good. Until Jesus comes back, very, very nice touch. Dan, one thing that struck me in your submission is how early on in your document and with what conviction you present yourselves as universal asset owners and accept the responsibility that comes with that. Actually, is that really so front of mind for you at the commissioners?
Yes, I think in particularly from the stewardship team and the way we've been looking at things, and historically from for a long time really on the system risk piece around climate, and more so with now nature and social inequality. But we are a highly diversified asset owner with exposure now all around the world in lots of different asset classes and lots of different sectors. So we do tend to think of things in the big picture terms.
Hey, and what is your view, Dan? This is going much more concretely into the awards. What's your view on the awards and on your submission? And is it the first year you submit for a prize?
Definitely not the first year. If we look at our investment policy, we've got aims around achieving target returns, around sustainable distributions, and also being at the forefront of responsible investment. And the PRI is the organization of note when it comes to responsible investment. So an endorsement from the PRI in terms of the nomination and the awards is a great external validation of our approach. So it's always nicer to win than to be nominated, but it kind of feeds back into that. How do we understand our position in the kind of the responsible investment ecosystem?
No, too early to tell, I have to say, Dan. But can you tell us a little bit about your submission? What was the project, and why did you feel it had the merit for it to be submitted amongst all the other work that you guys are doing?
So we submitted around work on the Investor Initiative for Human Rights Data, and apologies for another 5-letter acronym, but the IIHRD. So it's a collaboration between 20 plus investors who believe in that materiality of human rights and wanted to improve the breadth and the depth of data on human rights, as well as then how it's used in responsible investment. So the steering group is the Church Commissioners for England, Aviva Investors, and Scottish Widows. And we originally convened through the World Benchmarking Alliance. Our initiative's got 3 sort of sub-projects at different levels of maturity. The first is really focused on fundamental data points, and that's been a major area of effort for the broader investor members who've been engaging with data providers to map their offerings around these discrete human rights data points, and to encourage them to expand their coverage to their entire research universe, to address the gaps in the data, and then disaggregate that data so we can use it better. The second part's around proxy advisors and how they integrate human rights data, and that's kind of just getting going. And the third project's really around, within the IIHRD, is around the assessment of companies in relation to, we'll say, non-compliance with international human rights standards, but norms breaches is what most people talk about. So we've almost finished a set of principles for the ESG data providers, which when they're published will then go back into that first project to engage with the data providers on how they go about providing this information to investors. So a bit of a long rundown there. But as to the merits amongst our other work, I think it's about conducting and promoting work that's additive to the broader field of responsible investment, but where we can add sort of unique value and leaning into the fact that we are an asset owner. We don't choose the companies we invest in, but we have universal exposure and we recognize those big systemic risks and so and find those areas where we can really contribute and add to that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Your report, Integrating Human Rights in Responsible Investment, is a good example of your commitment to transparency as well. Can you tell us about your rationale for focusing on human rights as a systemic risk?
So the commissioners have had a long focus on climate change as a systemic risk. And after I arrived in 2022, we updated our RI policy to recognize climate change, nature loss, and social inequality as three interlinked systemic risks, with respect for people and planet as at the heart of that overlap on the Venn diagram. Because we see human rights as at the core of inequality issues. And also, if human rights aren't respected and protected, then the climate and nature transitions are either unlikely to happen, or if they do happen, there won't be a just transition. So it's not that we see human rights as a systemic risk, but more that human rights are a material issue in addressing those broader systemic risks.
Dan, thanks for that. How did the update of your responsible investment policy in 2022 inform your asset, your investment manager, and system level stewardship activities on human rights?
So I think a full description would probably be a bit long for a podcast, but I think it was about thinking about how to integrate human rights into the different levels of what we do and what was most appropriate for us as an asset owner. So at the bottom level where the assets are, one change was to introduce a kind of systematic approach to corporate accountability on human rights through voting. So while we already had a controversies process, we'd already been engaging on multiple human rights issues with companies, we wanted to translate our broad expectation of companies that they respect human rights into some tangible stewardship action across the public markets portfolio. So we updated our voting policy and we now vote against the re-election of chairs or relevant management resolutions where companies fail to demonstrate basic policy level commitments to respect human rights. Which also explains why we need the ESG data providers to create that data so it can feed back into that voting approach. The next level up is the manager level. So we've updated our responsible investment framework to include human rights more specifically. So that's used by us as a due diligence tool. So to set a minimum bar on all securities managers prior to receiving any funds, but also as a stewardship tool with multiple maturity levels within it. So where we encourage managers to escalate up that ladder to improve on and achieve. So that's an area for hopefully much more focus in the future. But it's obviously important that if we think something is material and important, then our managers are taking appropriate action. So we can build and use our leverage as their clients, and they can build and use their leverage as managers to ensure rights are respected and managed across the investments. And then at the system level, I think we've kind of spoken about then the IIHRD. That's the changing and shaping the data narrative so that all investors can integrate human rights data into their decision-making approaches in the future.
Dan, why are gaps so inherent to human rights data? And how do you go about trying to fix that?
I say there are gaps in any data set until someone addresses them and complains about them and tries to make a change. I've been banging the drum on social being the poor cousin to environmental and governance for a long time. And there's probably no single answer as to why. Environmental risk management got their foot in the door early with financial materiality, and that's been recognized at the company and the system level. Pure social sometimes ice skating uphill for both the company and the system level recognition. If you think back to SASB's early materiality matrix, human capital, which is intrinsically a human rights issue, wasn't seen as being financially material for many sectors. Human rights was only really kind of put into that matrix as something in the supply chain. So there was sort of deep recognition and understanding issues. If you chat to someone about health and safety, they say, "Oh, we're doing that, but that's not a human rights issue," because the misunderstanding of what is or isn't human rights. So there's a few bits that are problematic in terms of the understanding of that. And I've spoken about the IIHRD and data provision as that kind of individual contribution, but I'd also say that supporting things like the disclosure initiatives that embed human rights standards, like the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, that will lead to those disclosures, which in time the ESG providers can analyze and interpret, and then give information to investors to use in their own decision making. So I just say hats off to all the people trying to keep as much of those reporting standards in place in the EU at the moment.
Claire, do you have any questions for Dan before I go to my evergreen question for both of you?
I would ask you the question, Dan. I mean, it's very easy to talk about systems and systemic change and system stewardship, but interested on your take on how you do connect the dots between these topics. I mean, I think you touched on human rights being absolutely intrinsic to a climate transition or preserving nature, but how do investors start joining the dots on these things without it becoming so complicated that you just can't do it?
Yeah, I think it's a real struggle. We've had the conversation internally. When I joined, I was given just transition as a kind of legacy engagement piece, but actually, we have a planet lead now, and we've had that conversation about where does just transition sit. And the stuff that we've looked at elsewhere, we have to be talking about a transition and for it to be just. So it's transition just. And so realistically for me, it appears more in the climate in the nature space, and then coming in to support the social overlay for that. And so for the investor side, I think it's that breaking down the silos and being able to have that conversation and not be like buying and owning certain pieces and going, okay, well, this is cutting across both the planet and the people elements. So, right, you're doing this at every stage. Does this have either a social element, or on the social elements, does this have an environmental element? And doing that cut across. But I do think with all of this, it's so complex. There's so many systems. There's so many problems. There's so many pressures on investors to do different things that it's finding something that you can add to the area and drilling into that and really getting to know it and understand it, rather than trying to address every single system and every single issue at the same time, because there's nobody that has the resources and the time to do that.
And I hear you loud that additionality piece is super important. So thank you. I mean, if I may ask one more question, I wonder if you've got guidance for PRI and Laudes Foundation, who are trying to sort of bridge this gap and support the investor community to do the sorts of things that you're doing. What do you see the role of philanthropy in all of that, and the role of PRI? What could we add?
Okay, this is off the cuff on this side. I think with the philanthropy piece, it's stepping into the places where others find it very hard to do that. So grant funding for thought leadership, for developing things. We're tested against everything on both like fiduciary duty. We come under charity commission rules as well. We can't just come up with projects that aren't funded in that way. There's space for philanthropy to really step in, and Laudes has done a lot of that in supporting system transformation benchmarks of the World Benchmarking Alliance as an example, and creating that space to have those conversations and push boundaries and come up with good practice guides. There's a lot of great people working with investors who could pick up and run with those, but very few that have the time to to set up and create things on their own, because there's so many competing calls on resources and activities at the same time.
Okay, brilliant. Proud to be working with PRI on sort of that.
Absolutely. A question, I call it my evergreen question, and it also comes back in the title of our podcast, ROI, that we all know, that we've all known for decades, but we rebaptized it as in the responsibility of investing. Claire, what do you think? What do you see when you hear the responsibility of investing? Obviously in the sphere of doing good while investing well. What do you think of? What is our responsibility?
It's quite a big evergreen question, isn't it? So, and I think There's been a renewed focus on fiduciary duty recently. I've noticed that framing has come back, and a lot of re-debate about what it really means in practice. And I think if you invest in the world, you've got a responsibility both for the money you're investing and for the world that you're investing in. I think you can't get away from the responsibility in the former that means making a return. But I think we're all beginning to realize that if you do that at the expense of eroding the system that's going to underpin future well-being and returns, then you're not really doing anybody any favors, least of all the people that you're responsible to from a fiduciary point of view. So I think we've all got responsibilities in our jobs, and possibly the responsibility to investors is bigger and more complex than most. But I don't think we can escape that if we're going to have a world that's investable in the future, then we have to think about these issues, even if we're only doing it from a financial perspective.
All right. Thanks, Claire. Dan, what would be your answer? What is the responsibility of an investor these days?
I think I'm going to sound uniquely unoriginal after Claire's response there. But yeah, again, two parts. Firstly, fiduciary side. But I'd say that this responsibility the investor has to act in the best interest of either its clients, beneficiaries, organization. I don't think that should ever be proxied as a responsibility to maximize short-term returns or value. So I think that's really, really key. That shouldn't be sort of abbreviated in that way. And secondly, investors, mostly as companies, have a responsibility to respect human rights, to avoid infringing on the human rights of others, and address adverse impacts of which they're involved. So identify, avoid, mitigate, and remedy harms. So that's, specifically to what Claire's talking about there, the broader system piece, to really, really drill down onto the human rights lens. So twin responsibility to fiduciaries and to society when investing.
All right. Thank you very much, Claire. Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you very much, listeners. Today's program was about the PRI Awards, but allow me to say that it was on much more than the PRI Awards. It was on the work the Laudes Foundation is doing in transition. It gave us a very, very good and tangible example of how human rights are, and I'm paraphrasing Dan here now, should no longer be the poor cousin in everything we're trying to do with regards to sustainable and responsible investing. We are very, very much looking forward to looking at the winners, and those will be announced mid-September at New York Climate Week. What I didn't say is that the commissioner's submission is indeed a candidate for the recognition for action in human rights, but also to be the winner of the Asset Owner Awards as a guiding light of how asset owners should be looking and can be looking at continuous improvement and continuous innovation in responsible investing. Last thing to say is, if you like our podcast, give us a thumbs up on your favorite channel, and see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Claire. Thanks, listeners.